You touch that car, and I will have you arrested." The shriek ripped through the morning air like a chainsaw through silk. Vanessa Hartwell stood 3 feet from my face, finger jabbed toward my chest. Her voice hitting decibels that should have shattered every window on Pinecrest Drive. You hear me. Arrested. I am the HOA president, and this is a lawful enforcement action. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stood there in my own driveway, coffee mug still in hand, staring at the woman who'd just declared war on the wrong man. Vanessa. I said, my voice so calm it was almost a whisper, "That's my garage." "And your Mercedes?" I gestured at the gleaming black beast parked sideways across both my garage doors like some $80,000 roadblock. "Has been blocking my property for 72 hours. Move it. Now." Her face went crimson. Actually, crimson. Like someone had pumped beet juice directly into her veins. I don't take orders from landscaping criminals. She screamed, spittle flying. "You've been in violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3 for months. Those disgusting roses of yours are a blight on this community. And until you cut them down, your precious garage access is revoked." Behind her, at least 30 neighbors had materialized like they'd been summoned by some invisible bell. Phones raised. Recording? Filming every second. Misses. Chen clutched her pearls. The Morrison twins sat on their bikes, eyes wide as dinner plates. Even grumpy old Walter Jenkins had shuffled out in his bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, settling into his porch chair like he was front row at a prize fight. Revoked, I repeated, letting the word hang there. "You can't revoke access to my own property." "Vanessa." I just did. She was screaming now. Full volume, arms gesticulating wildly. "The HOA covenant gives me full authority to enforce compliance by any means necessary. And if that means parking my vehicle across your driveway until you obey the rules, then so be it." The crowd gasped. Someone muttered, "She's lost her mind." Another voice. "Quieter. He's not going to let this stand." I set my coffee mug down on the hood of her Mercedes. Very carefully. Very deliberately. She gasped like I'd slapped her mother. "Get that off my car." "Move it off my driveway." "No." "Then I guess we're at an impasse." Her hand shot to her phone, fingers trembling with rage. "I'm calling the police right now. You're trespassing on HOA-managed property." I laughed. Couldn't help it. A short, sharp bark of genuine amusement. HOA-managed property. "Vanessa, this is my driveway. You parked your car here, without permission. 3 days ago. Enforcement action." She shrieked. "This is official OA business." The phones kept recording. Kids whispered. Adults shook their heads. And somewhere in that moment, watching Vanessa Hartwell completely unravel in front of 40 witnesses, I realized something important. This wasn't about roses. It wasn't about rules or regulations or community aesthetics. This was about power. Pure, unfiltered power. And Vanessa had just made the fatal mistake of thinking she could wield it against me without consequences. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that I don't just get mad. I get creative. And in about 72 hours, that gleaming black Mercedes she loved so much was going to take a ride she'd never forget. Straight up. into the sky. This wasn't just another HOA dispute anymore. This was war. I'm 42 years old, and I've been living in Pinecrest Meadows, just outside Austin, Texas, for going on 16 years now. Bought the house back in 2009 when the neighborhood was still half constructed, when dirt roads outnumbered paved ones, and when nobody gave a damn if your mailbox was exactly regulation height or if your roses grew an inch past some invisible approved aesthetic boundary that existed only in the fevered imagination of future tyrants. Back then, Pinecrest was a real neighborhood. The kind where people actually knew each other's names. Where kids played street hockey until the streetlights came on, and nobody called it a safety violation. Where we had block parties every 4th of July and Labor Day, and everyone brought something homemade. And nobody, I mean nobody, checked if your potato salad met community culinary standards or if your lawn chairs were the HOA-approved shade of beige. We had diversity back then, too. Not the fake, corporate kind that gets slapped on brochures. Real diversity. The Chens ran a small accounting firm out of their garage. The Morrison family huge, loud, wonderful, had 6 kids and a trampoline that violated at least 9 codes that didn't exist yet. Walter Jenkins, the crankiest 70-year-old you'd ever meet, kept a vegetable garden that sprawled across half his backyard, with tomato plants that climbed so high they probably needed FAA clearance. It was messy. It was imperfect. It was alive. Then, in March of 2022, Vanessa Hartwell moved in. I remember the day clearly because it was impossible not to. The moving truck alone was a spectacle, not the usual budget rental, but one of those high-end, climate-controlled jobs that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Everything that came off that truck screamed money and control. Designer furniture wrapped in protective quilting, labeled boxes organized by room and category, and a small army of professional movers who worked with the precision of a military operation. Vanessa herself emerged from a brand new white Lexus like she was making a grand entrance at a gala. Hair perfect. Makeup flawless. Dressed in what I later learned was called athleisure expensive yoga pants and a matching jacket that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She surveyed the street like a general inspecting conquered territory. Within a week, the comments started. She approached Mrs. Chen one morning and, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, suggested that perhaps the Chens might want to reconsider the colorful wind chimes hanging on their porch. They're a bit eclectic for the neighborhood aesthetic, Vanessa had said, as if eclectic were a synonym for plague-carrying. She stopped the Morrison kids mid-game and informed them that street hockey was a liability concern and that all recreational activities should be confined to backyards or the community playground, which, incidentally, was 3 blocks away and had equipment so outdated it looked like a tetanus buffet. She lectured Walter Jenkins about his tomato plants, suggesting he might want to install proper screening so neighbors wouldn't have to look at agricultural clutter. Most people laughed it off, shrugged, figured she'd calm down once she settled in. They were wrong. 6 months after moving in, Vanessa appeared at an HOA board meeting. Now, you have to understand, before Vanessa, our HOA board meetings were these sleepy affairs held in someone's living room, where 5 or 6 residents would discuss things like whether we should replace the neighborhood entrance sign or organize a community garage sale. Nobody wanted to be on the board. It was volunteer work, unpaid and, frankly, kind of boring. Vanessa volunteered immediately. Smiled. Brought homemade cookies. Complimented everyone. Got herself elected to the board by unanimous vote because, hey, free labor. That was her beachhead. Within 3 months, she'd positioned herself as vice president. Within 6, the president, a sweet retired teacher named Dorothy Marsh, mysteriously resigned, citing health concerns. Word on the street was that Vanessa had uncovered some obscure bylaw violation in Dorothy's fence height and threatened to fine her into oblivion unless she stepped down. I don't know if that's true. But Dorothy moved out 4 months later, and nobody heard from her again. By March of 2023, exactly 1 year after moving in, Vanessa Hartwell was HOA president, and Pinecrest Meadows would never be the same. She started small. New rules about trash can visibility. Fines for leaving them out past 7 a.m. on collection day. Then it escalated. Regulations on mailbox designs. Approved paint colors. Restrictions on lawn decorations. Rules about vehicle types allowed in driveways. The Morrisons got fined because their work truck, a clean, well-maintained Ford F-150 didn't meet the aesthetic vehicle standards. Never mind that Tom Morrison was a contractor who needed that truck for his livelihood. Vanessa didn't care. $500. Pay up or face escalating penalties. Walter Jenkins got hit with violation notices because his tomato plants exceeded the maximum vegetation height for front yard gardens. He fought it. Vanessa buried him in paperwork until he finally ripped the whole garden out, tears streaming down his weathered face. The Chens took down their wind chimes. The kids stopped playing in the street. The block parties ended because nobody wanted to risk filing the necessary community gathering permits that Vanessa had somehow managed to make mandatory. Pinecrest Meadows didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a museum. Beautiful. Sterile, lifeless, and through it all, Vanessa smiled, clipboard in hand, designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She patrolled the streets like a warden, righting violations with the glee of someone who'd finally found her purpose in life. Most people caved, paid the fines, followed the rules, kept their heads down. But I had one problem. One thing I couldn't compromise on, no matter how many violation notices she stuffed in my mailbox. My grandmother's roses? My grandmother, Dorothy May Sullivan, wasn't just family. She was a force of nature. Born in 1932, lived through the Depression, buried 2 husbands, raised 4 kids, mostly on her own, and did it all with the kind of quiet strength that doesn't exist anymore. She bought this land, 15 acres of it, back in 1973, long before Austin sprawled this far out, when this was still considered way out in the country. She paid cash. $7,500. Money she'd saved working double shifts as a nurse at Brackenridge Hospital. The land was nothing special back then. Just scrubby Texas hill country cedar, limestone, the occasional rattlesnake. But Grandma Dorothy saw potential. She built a small house with her own hands, well, with help from neighbors and friends, back when people actually helped each other instead of citing code violations. And she planted roses, not just any roses. Heirloom varieties. Some of them over 100 years old. Climbers and floribundas and hybrid teas with names like Souvenir de la Malmaison and Madame Alfred Carrière. She ordered them from specialty nurseries, traded cuttings with other gardeners, propagated them with the patience of someone who understood that good things take time. Those roses became her legacy. They lined the fence that separated her property from the dirt road. They climbed the arbor she built over the front gate. They sprawled across trellises and spilled over stone walls, blooming in waves of pink and white and deep crimson from March through November. People used to drive out from Austin just to see them. Grandma Dorothy would give tours, share cuttings, teach anyone who wanted to learn. She never charged a penny. Said beauty was meant to be shared, not hoarded. When she died in 2007 peacefully, in her sleep, the way she deserved, I inherited the land. But by then, Austin had swallowed the countryside. Developers had already carved up the surrounding acreage, and the land I inherited was just this 5-acre plot with the old house and the roses. I couldn't afford to keep the original house property taxes alone would have buried me. So I sold most of it to a developer who promised to preserve the character of the area. That promise lasted about 6 months before they started bulldozing and surveying. But I kept 1 acre. The acre with the roses. I built my current house here, on the exact spot where Grandma Dorothy's kitchen used to be. Made sure the roses stayed exactly where she'd planted them. Every spring, when they bloomed, I could almost hear her voice. Land and roses. Johnny. They'll outlast all of us if we treat them right. Those roses were my connection to her. To a time when things were simpler. When beauty mattered more than compliance. And Vanessa Hartwell wanted them destroyed. She'd first mentioned it during one of her neighborhood compliance walks back in June of 2024. She'd appeared at my fence line with her ever-present clipboard, designer sunglasses, and an expression that managed to be both sweet and venomous. "Mr. Sullivan," she'd said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I'm afraid we have a situation." "What situation would that be?" "Vanessa, your roses." She gestured at the blooming hedge like it was a biohazard. They're in violation of Section 7. Paragraph 3 of the updated Landscaping Code. Maximum height for front yard ornamental plantings is 4 feet. Yours are, she actually pulled out a measuring tape, 6 feet, 8 inches. That's a 67% overage. I blinked. "Vanessa, these roses have been here for over 40 years. Irrelevant. The current code was ratified in March. All properties must comply within 90 days. These are heirloom roses. They can't just be chopped down to 4 feet. That would kill them." Her smile never wavered. "Then I suggest you remove them and plant something compliant. The community has approved lists of acceptable shrubs. I can provide you with a copy. I'm not removing my grandmother's roses." The smile tightened. "Mr. Sullivan, I understand you have sentimental attachment. But rules are rules. Everyone must comply. Otherwise, she made a show of writing something on her clipboard, will have no choice but to impose fines." "Fine me, then." And she did. The first violation notice arrived 3 days later. $250 for non-compliant front yard vegetation. I ignored it. The second notice came 2 weeks after that $500, plus the original $250, plus late fees. Then $1,000, then $1,500. By early October of 2024, I'd accumulated over $4,000 in fines, all for refusing to butcher roses my grandmother had planted with her own hands. But money wasn't Vanessa's real weapon. Public humiliation was, and that's where the Mercedes came in. The morning of October 9th started like any other. I woke up, made coffee, stepped outside to grab the newspaper, and froze. There, parked perfectly sideways across both of my garage doors, was Vanessa's black Mercedes GLS. Not at the curb. Not on the street. Directly across my driveway, blocking me in completely. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe she'd lost control. Maybe there was an emergency. Then I saw the note. It was tucked under my windshield wiper. Written in her sharp, aggressive handwriting on HOA letterhead. Mr. Sullivan, perhaps this will help you remember that no one is above HOA compliance. Trim the roses to regulation height, or next time I'll have your vehicle booted and impounded. This is your final warning. Vanessa Hartwell, HOA President. I read it twice. Then I laughed, a short, bitter sound that echoed in the quiet morning air. This woman had just parked her $80,000 Mercedes across my property to punish me for flowers. Flowers. By 9 a.m., the entire street knew. Neighbors trickled out, some walking dogs they didn't usually walk, others suddenly needing to check their mailboxes. Teenagers on bikes circled the cul-de-sac, filming everything. Mrs. Chen whispered to her husband loud enough for me to hear, "He's not going to let that slide, is he?" I stepped outside, coffee still in hand. Vanessa. I called across the street, "Mind moving your car?" Her front door swung open. Out she stepped. And I have to admit, she knew how to make an entrance. Hair styled in perfect waves. Makeup flawless. Wearing an all-black designer tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. She held her phone like a weapon. That's a lawful immobilization of property. She announced loud enough for everyone to hear. You've repeatedly refused to comply with HOA regulations. Until you do. Your access is restricted. Restricted? I kept my voice calm. Vanessa, this is my driveway. My property? She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You signed the covenant when you bought this house. The HOA has full authority to enforce compliance measures. The neighbors murmured. Some looked away. Others bit their lips to keep from laughing. Move it, I said quietly, or I'll have it towed. Her smile widened. Go ahead. The towing company is under contract with the HOA. They won't touch my vehicle without my authorization. And just like that, she turned and walked back inside, leaving her Mercedes sprawled across my driveway like a monument to her power. The crowd buzzed. Someone muttered, "She's gone too far this time." Another shook his head. He's done for. Phones kept recording. 'Cause that's what we do now. Watch each other's misery through screens. I stared at that Mercedes. Polished. Perfect. Positioned to humiliate me in front of everyone I knew. And something inside me shifted. This wasn't about roses anymore. This wasn't about fines or rules or landscaping codes. This was about power. Vanessa wanted to show the entire neighborhood that she could crush anyone who defied her. Fine. If power was the game, I'd show her what happens when you push the wrong person too far. Because in that moment, staring at her luxury vehicle gleaming in the October sun, an idea sparked in my mind, one that would take this HOA feud to heights Vanessa could never have imagined. Literally. By day 2, the Mercedes had become more than just a car. It was a symbol, a trophy, a gleaming black declaration that Vanessa Hartwell owned Pinecrest Meadows and everyone in it. Every time I looked outside, there it sat, $80,000 of German engineering converted into a roadblock. Neighbors treated it like a tourist attraction. Kids circled it on scooters, pointing and giggling. Joggers slowed down to take photos. One guy actually set up a folding chair across the street with a cooler of beer, narrating the drama to anyone who walked by. Day 2 of the Great Garage Standoff. He'd announce like a sports commentator. Sullivan's still blocked? Vanessa's still smug. Place your bets, folks. And Vanessa. She basked in it. She paraded up and down the sidewalk in her designer workout gear, stopping to lecture anyone within earshot about community standards and the consequences of non-compliance. She'd pause dramatically in front of her Mercedes, run her hand along the hood like it was a faithful guard dog, and smile at me across the street. On the morning of day 3, I caught her holding court in front of Mrs. Chen's house, clipboard in hand, scolding 3 neighbors about their recycling bins being the wrong shade of green, all while her Mercedes still sat across my driveway. I walked over, calm, collected. Morning, Vanessa. Just curious, how long are you planning to run this little blockade? She didn't even look at me. Until compliance is achieved. Compliance. I repeated slowly. Vanessa, these are roses. Not a meth lab. She turned then, lowering her sunglasses with theatrical precision. Rules are rules. Mr. Sullivan, until you trim those roses to regulation height, you'll find your property access restricted. The neighbors leaned in, phones angled perfectly. This had stopped being a conflict. It was a reality show. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A full, echoing laugh that bounced off the houses. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? She sniffed. Someone has to maintain standards. Otherwise, Pinecrest would look like this. She waved vaguely at my immaculate lawn. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My lawn was better than most on the block. This wasn't about landscaping. This was Vanessa flexing her authority in front of an audience. But here's the thing about audiences. They remember the show, not the rules. And Vanessa was giving them a show they'd never forget. That evening, I watched from my porch as she stroked the hood of her Mercedes, murmuring something that sounded like, "Good work." Then she disappeared inside, leaving the car like a sentry guarding conquered territory. I sipped my bourbon and let the idea crystallize. She wasn't moving that car. She wanted it there. It was her victory flag. Fine. Let her wave it. Because the higher she climbed on her tower of arrogance, the harder she'd fall when I kicked it out from under her. The next morning, I tried the obvious routes first. I called the police. The officer who answered actually chuckled. "Sir, unless the vehicle is creating a traffic hazard or blocking a public road. It's a civil matter. You'd need to go through the courts." Civil matter. I muttered after hanging up. That's code for you're on your own. I called 3 different towing companies. Every single one told me the same thing. They had contracts with the Pinecrest Meadows HOA. They wouldn't touch Vanessa's Mercedes without her written authorization. She'd locked down every conventional option. That's when I realized something important. Vanessa thought she was untouchable. She'd built herself a fortress of rules, contracts, and connections. She believed she'd outmaneuvered me completely. But I've never been much for conventional solutions. See, I'm a contractor specifically. I run a small logistics and heavy equipment company. Dump trucks, forklifts, cranes, industrial machinery, and more importantly, I have friends. Friends with very specialized skills. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Marcus Hawkeye Jensen. Marcus and I went way back, 15 years, to be exact. We'd worked together on a bridge renovation project in Houston back in 2009. He'd since moved on to running a heavy lift helicopter service out of San Antonio. The kind of operation that moves shipping containers, steel beams, and construction equipment that's too large or too heavy for roads. I hit call. Hawkeye, I said when he picked up. You still flying those sky cranes? You know it. He replied, his voice crackling with the enthusiasm of someone who loved his job. What do you need? Johnny. I hesitated, savoring the moment. A car? I need you to move a car. Silence, then laughter. A car. Man. My birds lift I-beams and shipping containers. Not Honda Civics. It's not a Civic. I said, it's a Mercedes GLS. About 5,000 pounds. And it's parked illegally across my driveway. I've got documentation. Witnesses. The whole 9 yards. The laughter stopped. Illegally. Yep. The HOA president decided to use her vehicle as a weapon. Parked it across my garage to punish me for not cutting my grandmother's roses. Been there 3 days now. Another pause. Then, and you want me to dald? What? Airlift it. Exactly. Johnny, that's insane. I know. I love it. Send me the address. Let's make it happen. Over the next 48 hours, I planned every detail. This couldn't just be a stunt, it had to be bulletproof legally. Vanessa was the queen of lawsuits, and I wasn't giving her ammunition. I pored over city ordinances, parking laws, property rights, statutes, and sure enough, I found it. Parking across someone's driveway for an extended period without permission constitutes criminal trespassing under Texas Penal Code Section 30.05. And trespassing property can be removed by reasonable means. Was airlifting a Mercedes by helicopter reasonable? Maybe not in most places, but in Texas, with the right paperwork and documentation. Absolutely. I consulted with a lawyer friend over lunch, nothing formal, just a casual conversation. I laid out the scenario without using names. He smirked, took a sip of his beer, and said, if it's blocking your garage and you've got photographic evidence with timestamps, technically, it's trespass. You've got the right to have it removed. Just don't drop it in a lake or anything stupid. What about, say, a front lawn? He raised an eyebrow. Whose lawn? Someone who'd appreciate the message. He laughed. As long as you've got permission for the landing site and you're not creating a public hazard, it's your circus. Just document everything. Permission? That was the key. See, Vanessa wasn't operating alone. Her biggest enabler was City Councilman Robert Preston. They were friends. Maybe more than friends. Depending on who you asked. Vanessa had donated heavily to his last 2 campaigns. In return, he'd turned a blind eye to her creative interpretation of HOA authority, approved every regulation she proposed, and even helped her strong-arm the towing contracts into place. So, what better place to return her precious Mercedes than right on Councilman Preston's perfectly manicured front lawn? In his gated community, during his Saturday morning tennis brunch, it was poetic. It was just, and it would be absolutely unforgettable. I made some calls. Turns out Councilman Preston's yard maintenance company was owned by a guy I'd helped out 5 years ago when his truck broke down during a job. He owed me a favor. A big one. You want to do what? He asked when I explained, land a helicopter on Preston's lawn. Just for a minute. To deliver something? What are you delivering? Justice. He laughed so hard I thought he'd drop the phone. Say no more. Saturday morning. Right. Preston hosts his tennis club brunch. I'll make sure the lawn's been aerated and the sprinklers are off. You've got a 10-minute window between 9:30 and 9:40. After that, the caterers arrive. That's all I need. We scheduled the lift for Saturday morning, October 19th. Early enough that the whole neighborhood would be awake. Late enough that everyone would be comfortable. Relaxed. Phones within easy reach. Prime audience conditions. I didn't advertise it. But I dropped a few subtle hints to trusted neighbors. Might want to keep your phones charged Saturday morning. I told Mrs. Chen casually. Her eyes lit up like Christmas. Something happening. She asked. Let's just say the Mercedes situation is about to resolve itself. Walter Jenkins caught the hint too. Should I set up my chair? Front row seat. Walter. Wouldn't miss it if I were you. Meanwhile, I played defeated around Vanessa. Every time I saw her, I acted resigned, beaten down. I let her think she'd won. On Friday afternoon, she caught me staring at her Mercedes from my porch. She strolled over. Designer sunglasses glinting in the sun. Getting used to the view. She asked smugly. I shrugged. Guess so. You've got me beat. Vanessa. She beamed like a queen accepting tribute. That's what happens when you fight the HOA. Mr. Sullivan, rules exist for a reason. The sooner you learn that, the easier your life will be. I'm sure you're right. She actually patted my shoulder. I'm glad you're finally seeing sense. Trim those roses this weekend, and I'll move my car Monday morning. We can put this whole unpleasant business behind us. Sure thing, Vanessa. As she walked away, practically floating with victory, I thought, if only you knew. The night before the big event, I hardly slept. I sat at my kitchen table, maps and photos spread out, checking every detail one last time. Marcus had his rigging crew ready industrial chains, safety straps, backup systems. We'd done risk assessments. We'd rehearsed the sequence on paper. It was foolproof. By the time Saturday morning arrived, I was buzzing with anticipation. I poured my coffee, stepped onto my porch at exactly 8 a.m., and looked at the Mercedes gleaming in the early morning light. In 90 minutes, it wouldn't be there. In 90 minutes, it would be the centerpiece of the greatest HOA scandal Austin had ever seen. And when it was over, Vanessa would learn the most important lesson of her life. Don't start a war with someone who knows how to fly. Saturday morning in Pinecrest Meadows usually meant quiet streets. The smell of pancakes drifting from open windows. Kids riding bikes before the Texas heat kicked in. Peaceful. Ordinary. Boring. Not this Saturday. I started my day like any other coffee in hand. Wearing old jeans and a faded University of Texas Longhorns t-shirt, acting like the most unremarkable suburban dad on the block. I even waved at Vanessa when she stepped out at 8:15 in her matching lavender athleisure set, holding what looked like a green smoothie but probably tasted like liquefied grass clippings. Morning. I called, keeping my voice tired, defeated. She smiled, a sharp, satisfied smile. Morning, Mr. Sullivan. Lovely day, isn't it? Sure is. She glanced at her Mercedes, still parked triumphantly across my driveway. I trust you'll be taking care of those roses today. Working on it right now. I lied smoothly. She nodded, believing every word. Excellent. I knew you'd come around eventually. Compliance doesn't have to be painful. You know. You're absolutely right. Vanessa. She practically glowed with victory as she walked back inside. If only she knew that at that exact moment, 30 miles away in San Antonio, Marcus was warming up a Sikorsky 64 Skycrane, a beast of a helicopter designed to lift up to 20,000 pounds of cargo. My phone buzzed at 8:45. Birds hot. Pre-flight complete. ETA, 45 minutes. Weather's perfect. Let's do this. My heart hammered. I glanced at my watch. By 9:30, the entire neighborhood would be awake, caffeinated, and perfectly positioned to witness history. I stepped back inside and made one final check of my documentation, multiple photos of the Mercedes blocking my driveway from different angles, all time-stamped. Witness statements from Mrs. Chen, Walter Jenkins, and 3 other neighbors. Copies of the Texas Penal Code regarding trespassing. Videos showing Vanessa explicitly refusing to move the vehicle. Everything was in order. At 9:15, I heard it, the first faint thump, thump, thump echoing across the sky. Still miles away, but getting closer. Heads turned on the street. Dogs started barking. Coffee mugs paused mid-sip. Mrs. Chen stepped onto her porch, shading her eyes. What is that noise? The sound grew louder, closer, deeper, until even the most oblivious neighbor realized something massive was approaching. The helicopter crested the tree line at 9:28, a monstrous red and white machine with twin rotors that looked like they could slice through buildings. Sunlight flashed off its cockpit windows. The downdraft hit the neighborhood like a hurricane, sending tree branches swaying wildly, loose papers flying, lawn chairs tumbling. Gasps erupted across the street. Phones shot up instantly. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Is that it's a helicopter?" A kid screamed with pure joy. Vanessa appeared at her window, confused at first, then alarmed as the massive aircraft descended directly toward her Mercedes. The Skycrane hovered 50 feet up, rotors thundering, wind blasting across lawns. Neighbors clutched their hair, their hats, their coffee cups. Kids screamed with excitement. Adults stood frozen in disbelief. And Vanessa. She burst out of her house like she'd been launched from a cannon. Her hair whipped wildly in the rotor wash. Her lavender tracksuit flapped like a flag in a storm. She stumbled forward, arms waving, screaming at the sky. "What is this? Stop. Stop right now." But her voice was completely swallowed by the deafening roar of the helicopter. Marcus's rigging crew rappelled down like special forces operators, 2 men, in safety harnesses and hard hats, moving with practiced efficiency. Within 60 seconds, industrial-grade chains wrapped around the Mercedes' frame, secured at 4 reinforced points, double-checked, triple-locked. The crowd went absolutely wild. Phones captured every angle. Laughter and cheers mixed with the thundering blades. Vanessa charged forward like she was going to physically stop them. That's my car. I'm the HOA president. I demand you stop this right now. One of the riggers gave her a thumbs up and a friendly wave, then signaled to Marcus. The chains went taut. The Mercedes shuddered. And then slowly, majestically, impossibly, the car lifted off the pavement. Up it went. 6 inches. 1 foot. 3 feet. 6 feet. 10 feet. Sunlight exploded off the black paint like a supernova. The Mercedes swayed gently in the air. Chains glinting, looking like some bizarre modern art installation. The neighborhood erupted. Cheers. Applause. Screams of disbelief. Kids jumped up and down, pointing. Adults laughed so hard they had to sit down on their lawns. Mrs. Chen was crying tears of joy. Walter Jenkins pumped his fist in the air like his team had just won the Super Bowl. And Vanessa. Vanessa fell to her knees in the middle of the street, reaching toward the sky like she was watching her firstborn child ascend to heaven. No. Put it down. You can't do this. This is illegal. This is. But it was too late. The Mercedes rose higher 15 feet. 20 feet, 30 feet, until it hung, suspended above Pinecrest Drive, like a dark jewel catching the morning sun. And I just stood there, on my porch, coffee mug in hand, bathrobe flapping in the wind, watching Vanessa's empire literally fly away. The helicopter banked slowly, carrying the Mercedes up and away, rising above the rooftops. People chased it down the street, phones raised, capturing the most absurd, glorious thing they'd ever witnessed in their lives. Vanessa stumbled after it, tripping over her own feet, screaming threats that nobody could hear over the rotor noise. Bring it back. You can't take it. That's mine. I'll have you all arrested. I'll sue everyone. This is theft. This is. But the helicopter just kept rising, carrying her precious Mercedes higher and higher until it was just a black speck against the blue Texas sky. Marcus's voice crackled in my earpiece. Package secure. Chains holding perfect. Heading to drop point. ETA 12 minutes. I smiled, taking a slow sip of coffee. Make it memorable. Hawkeye. Because this wasn't the finale. Not even close. The neighbors thought we were taking it to an impound lot. Maybe a junkyard. Maybe we'd drop it in an empty field somewhere as a lesson. They had no idea where that Mercedes was really going. And neither did Vanessa. The helicopter thundered across Austin. The Mercedes swaying beneath it like the world's most expensive wrecking ball. The sight was so surreal, so impossible. That traffic on I-35 actually stopped. Cars pulled over. People got out with their phones, filming, pointing, laughing. Is that a car? Somebody's having the worst day ever. This is the most Texas thing I've ever seen. By the time the sky crane reached its destination 12 minutes later, half the city knew something insane was happening. Social media had exploded. Helicopter carrying a Mercedes over downtown Austin. HOA Karen getting what she deserves. Is this real life? The footage was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Local news stations were already scrambling reporters. But the best part, the absolute pièce de résistance, was still to come. City Councilman Robert Preston lived in Westlake Hills. in a gated estate with manicured lawns that looked like they'd been trimmed with nail scissors by a team of perfectionists. That morning, he was hosting his weekly Saturday tennis brunch, a who's who of Austin's political and social elite. City officials, campaign donors, country club members, real estate developers. Champagne flutes clinked on white tablecloths. A string quartet played Mozart. Caterers circulated with trays of smoked salmon and caviar. Until the shadow fell. Guests looked up, shielding their eyes from the morning sun. As the helicopter descended toward the estate, the downdraft hit like a Category 5. Hurricane tablecloths whipped into the air. Champagne glasses toppled and shattered. The string quartet scattered like startled birds. Sheet music flying everywhere. Women screamed. Men shouted. Someone's toupee actually blew off and tumbled across the lawn. And there, suspended above them like divine judgment, slowly descending through the chaos, was Vanessa Hartwell's gleaming black Mercedes GLS. Chaos. Pure, beautiful chaos. Councilman Preston himself stood frozen in the center of his lawn, mouth hanging open, a glass of champagne somehow still clutched in his hand, watching in absolute horror as the Mercedes descended toward his pristine, tournament-grade grass. What in the what is happening? He bellowed, his carefully groomed hair now standing straight up in the rotor wash. Marcus maneuvered the sky crane with surgical precision, bringing the Mercedes down gently, so gently, right in the center of Preston's emerald lawn. The car landed with a heavy thud, flattening a 10-foot circle of grass that probably cost more per square foot than most people's houses. The chains released with a metallic clank. The helicopter rose, rotors still thundering, creating one final blast of wind that sent the last of the champagne glasses tumbling and knocked over an entire buffet table loaded with expensive hors d'oeuvres. And then it was gone, disappearing back into the sky, leaving nothing but devastation, scattered food, and one very expensive black Mercedes sitting like an absurd sculpture in the middle of Preston's Saturday brunch. The guests stood in shocked silence for exactly 3 seconds. Then the phones came out. Every single person, donors, officials, country club members started filming, photographing, posting. Within minutes, the footage exploded online. Number Mayor's Lawn Mercedes trended on Twitter within 10 minutes. HOA president's car airlifted to councilman's lawn during brunch was the top story on every local news site. Memes spawned faster than weeds. When your HOA president finally gets what she deserves, I didn't know Amazon delivered cars. Special delivery for corruption. Back in Pinecrest Meadows, neighbors crowded around phones, jaws dropping as they realized where the car had actually gone. He dropped it on Preston's lawn. Someone shouted. During his brunch party, with all those rich people there, Mrs. Chen grabbed my arm, tears of laughter streaming down her face. Johnny Sullivan, you absolute legend. Walter Jenkins raised his coffee mug in salute. That's the greatest thing I've ever seen in 73 years of living. The Morrison kids started chanting, Mayor's Lawn Mercedes. Mayor's Lawn Mercedes. Even people who'd never supported me, who'd paid Vanessa's fines without complaint, were laughing, cheering, celebrating. For the first time in years, Pinecrest Meadows felt alive again. Vanessa, meanwhile, was on the phone within seconds of realizing where her car had gone. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. I could see her pacing in her living room, gesticulating wildly, screaming into her phone while watching the footage replay on every news channel. Word spread later about what happened on that call. Apparently, she'd called Councilman Preston, expecting sympathy, support, maybe even help pressing charges. Instead, he'd torn into her, screaming that she'd embarrassed him in front of major donors, that she'd brought scandal to his doorstep, that the footage of a Mercedes landing on his lawn during his brunch was now the top trending topic in Austin, and he was being mocked nationally. "This is your fault. Vanessa," he'd reportedly shouted. "Your ridiculous vendetta. Your abuse of HOA power. I've got the mayor calling me. The city attorney calling me. Reporters camped outside my gate, all because of your car on my lawn." For the first time in her reign of terror, Vanessa was on the receiving end of the fury she'd unleashed on others for so long. By noon, Councilman Preston had issued a public statement distancing himself from Vanessa and the HOA. He condemned overzealous enforcement actions and promised a full review of HOA regulations. He even threatened to fine Vanessa personally for unauthorized landing of property on his lawn and the damage to his grass. The irony was delicious. By evening, news trucks had set up outside both Vanessa's house and Preston's estate. Local anchors stood in front of cameras, struggling to keep straight faces as they reported on the story. In what can only be described as an unprecedented act of suburban protest, one reporter said, barely containing a smile. A resident's vehicle was airlifted from a neighborhood driveway and deposited on City Councilman Robert Preston's front lawn during a private fundraising brunch this morning. The vehicle belongs to HOA President Vanessa Hartwell, who has declined our requests for comment. But the internet didn't need her comment. The footage said everything. Online. The response was overwhelming. This is the greatest revenge story of 2025. HOA Karen finally got what she deserved. Whoever planned this deserves a medal and a parade. I'm crying laughing at the brunch guests running from the helicopter. The string quartet scattering is the best part. Local comedians made jokes about it. Late night shows picked up the story. It went viral nationally, then internationally. By Sunday, news outlets in England, Australia, and Japan were covering the Great Texas Mercedes airlift. Vanessa had wanted to humiliate me publicly, to make an example of me. Instead, she'd made herself a global laughingstock. By Monday morning, the real consequences started hitting. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. I showed up, calm as could be, and sat in the back row while Vanessa tried desperately to salvage her authority. She walked in wearing a navy blue blazer over a crisp white blouse, hair pulled back severe and tight, trying to project the power she'd already lost. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her clipboard. "We need to address the criminal actions committed this weekend," she began, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "The theft and vandalism of my personal property, theft. Patricia Simmons, a board member, Vanessa, had once fined $300 for having the wrong shade of mulch. Stood up. Vanessa, you parked your car illegally on Mr. Sullivan's property for 4 days. That's trespassing. HE didn't steal anything. He had trespassing property removed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Vanessa's face flushed. "I was enforcing HOA regulations. That's my job as president." "No," Patricia said firmly, and I could hear years of suppressed anger in her voice. "Your job is to serve the community, not harass residents who don't bow to your every whim, not find people into compliance. not turn this neighborhood into your personal dictatorship." The room erupted in applause. Vanessa stood there, trembling, as person after person stood up and shared their stories. The fines they'd paid, the rules they'd followed out of fear. The joy that had been sucked out of Pinecrest Meadows under her reign. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. 11-2. Vanessa Hartwell was removed as HOA president, effective immediately. She stood there for a long moment, clipboard dangling uselessly from her hand, dethroned in front of everyone she'd bullied for years. Then, without a word, she walked out. The legal consequences came next. On Tuesday, Councilman Preston filed formal complaints with the city. Criminal trespassing for parking on my property, property damage for his lawn, and abuse of HOA authority. The city attorney opened an investigation into HOA corruption, specifically looking at the cozy relationship between Vanessa and Preston, at contracts awarded without competitive bidding, at fines collected and never properly accounted for. By Wednesday, the local news had dug up more dirt. Vanessa had been fining residents and pocketing portions of the money through a compliance consulting company she'd set up. Thousands of dollars over 2 years. That's when the criminal charges came: embezzlement, fraud, abuse of office. Suddenly, Vanessa wasn't just embarrassed. She was facing real prison time. Her lawyer advised her to settle, pay restitution, resign from all HOA positions, and leave quietly. She fought it for about a week. Then the evidence became overwhelming and the legal bills started mounting. On October 30th, Vanessa Hartwell signed a settlement agreement. She would pay back $43,000 in improperly collected fines, cover all damages to Councilman Preston's lawn, resign from the HOA board permanently, and never hold any position of authority in Pinecrest Meadows again. She also agreed to drop all charges against me. Not that she had any. My lawyer had demolished every claim she'd tried to make. The day after the settlement was finalized, a "for sale" sign appeared in front of her house. As for me, I went back to living my life. I trimmed my roses when I felt like it, not because someone demanded it, but because they needed care. I parked in my own driveway without fear. I grilled burgers on my porch while neighbors waved and smiled instead of averting their eyes in fear. One evening, Mrs. Chen brought over homemade dumplings. "For the hero of Pinecrest," she said with a wink. Tom Morrison stopped by with a 6-pack of Shiner Bock. "You did what we all wanted to do, but were too scared to try," he said. I clinked bottles with him. Sometimes you just have to fight fire with fire. Or in this case, ego with altitude. He laughed so hard, beer came out his nose. The neighborhood changed too. The new HOA president was Patricia Simmons, and her first act was to repeal 80% of Vanessa's ridiculous rules. No more fines for visible trash cans. No more regulations on vehicle types. No more approved paint color lists or maximum vegetation heights. The Morrisons' trampoline went back up. Walter Jenkins replanted his tomato garden. The Chens hung new wind chimes, even louder than the originals. Kids played street hockey again. We organized a 4th of July block party, no permits required. Pinecrest Meadows felt like home again. Vanessa never apologized. Not once. She slunk around for a few weeks, avoiding eye contact, muttering about conspiracies and unfair treatment. She couldn't look at her new Mercedes without remembering. Every time she saw it, she probably heard the helicopter, saw it dangling in the sky, remembered the laughter of neighbors she'd thought she controlled. On November 15th, the moving truck arrived. Big, professional, expensive, just like when she'd moved in. But the neighbors didn't come out to watch, sadly, this time. They gathered on their lawns and porches, and as the truck pulled away, they waved. Not goodbye waves. Victory waves. Someone started slow clapping. Then someone else joined in. Within seconds, the entire street was applauding as Vanessa Hartwell's moving truck disappeared around the corner. The air felt lighter after that. Birds sang louder. The sun seemed brighter. Pinecrest Meadows was free. That evening, I stood by my grandmother's roses with a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The roses were blooming beautifully pink and white and deep crimson, just like Grandma Dorothy had planted them. Wild. Untamed. Absolutely perfect. I thought about the whole saga. The Mercedes. The helicopter. The chains. The roar of the rotors. Vanessa's scream as her car lifted into the Texas sky. The crowd's laughter when it landed on Preston's lawn. And I thought, sometimes the best revenge isn't quiet. Sometimes it's loud enough to shake an entire neighborhood. Sometimes it flies. If there's one thing this whole experience taught me, it's this. Bullies thrive in silence. They count on people being too polite, too tired, or too afraid to push back. Vanessa ruled Pinecrest for years because most of us just rolled our eyes, muttered under our breath, and paid the fines. She mistook our patience for weakness. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just people waiting for someone to make the first move. And when that move finally comes, when someone decides enough is enough, that's when the real reckoning begins. Power built on fear is fragile. The moment someone shines a light on it, or, in this case, lifts it 30 feet into the air with a Sikorsky sky crane, the whole illusion shatters. Now, I'm not saying everyone should go rent a heavy lift helicopter. Most people don't have access to one. And, honestly, it was probably overkill. But I am saying this. Don't let small tyrants dictate your life. Whether it's an HOA, president, a boss, a neighbor. Whoever you have more power than you think. Creativity. Courage. Documentation. And sometimes, just a little bit of Texas-sized audacity. At the end of the day, standing up to bullies isn't about revenge. It's about dignity. It's about reminding yourself and everyone watching that you're not someone to be stepped on. You're someone who fights back, even if that fight happens at 1,000 feet. My grandmother used to say, "Land and roses. Johnny, treat them right, and they'll outlast all of us." She was right about the roses. But I think she'd have been proud of what I did with the land, too. Because sometimes, protecting what matters means taking a stand. And sometimes, that stand requires thinking bigger than anyone expects, high enough that the whole city can see, loud enough that no one can ignore it, bold enough that people remember it years later and smile. The roses are still blooming. The neighborhood is free. And somewhere, I like to think Grandma Dorothy is looking down, shaking her head, and laughing. That's my grandson. She's probably saying, "Never did things the easy way. But damn if he doesn't get results. Rest in peace. Grandma, your roses are safe. And Pinecrest Meadows is finally home again."